Good evening, and welcome to my stream. I am the Queer Christian Anarcho-Communist. On this show I read what I hope is easy-to-understand theory. That is, things smart people wrote that explain how the world works, why it sucks for workers, people of color, disabled people, queer people, the poor, and basically everyone that isn't a rich, white, cishet man, from the point of view that God is on the side of the poor. The point is to spur all of us on to take action. As Karl Marx said, the philosophers have only interpreted the world in various ways. The point, however, is to change it. If we workers want to emancipate ourselves, we can't do that by just listening to streams or giving money to self-proclaimed leftists on Patreon. We need to do the work of bringing to birth a new world from the ashes of the old. To that end, there are several organizations that need our time, talent, money, and effort. In particular, I want to signal boost Food Not Bombs, the Black Rose Anarchist Federation, the John Brown Gun Club, the Socialist Rifle Association, and the Industrial Workers of the World. I strongly support the IWW in particular because it is my union, and I believe in its mission as an organization of, by, and for the working class. And so I want to begin this and every stream by reading part of the preamble to the IWW Constitution. The working class and the employing class have nothing in common. There can be no peace so long as hunger and want are found among millions of the working people, and the few who make up the employing class have all the good things of life. Between these two classes a struggle must go on until the workers of the world organize as a class, take possession of the means of production, abolish the wage system, and live in harmony with the earth. Instead of the conservative motto, a fair day's wage for a fair day's work, we must inscribe on our banner the revolutionary watchword, abolition of the wage system. It is the historic mission of the working class to do away with capitalism. The army of production must be organized, not only for everyday struggle with capitalists, but also to carry on production when capitalism shall have been overthrown. By organizing industrially, we are forming the structure of the new society within the shell of the old. Now that that's out of the way, here's our reading for today. The Anarchist FAQ, beginning with A.1.2. What does anarchism mean? I do not have a particular stopping point planned for tonight, but as usual, we will aim for about an hour's worth of reading. As usual, the text is on the right-hand side of the screen, so you can follow along. And now, we begin. A.1.2. What does anarchism mean? To quote Peter Kropotkin, anarchism is the no-government system of socialism. In other words, the abolition of exploitation and oppression of man by man. That is, the abolition of private property, i.e., capitalism and government. Enrico Malatesta, Towards Anarchism. Anarchism, therefore, is a political theory that aims to create a society which is without political, economic, or social hierarchies. Anarchists maintain that anarchy, the absence of rulers, is a viable form of social system, and so work for the maximization of individual liberty and social equality. They see the goals of liberty and equality as mutually self-supporting, or in Bakunin's famous dictum, we are convinced that that freedom without socialism is privilege and injustice, and that socialism without freedom is slavery and brutality. The political philosophy of Bakunin. The history of human society proves this point. Liberty without equality is only liberty for the powerful, and equality without liberty is impossible and a justification for slavery. While there are many types of anarchism, from individualist anarchism to communist anarchism, see section A.3 for more details, there has always been two common positions at the core of all of them: opposition to government and opposition to capitalism. In the words of the individualist anarchist Benjamin Tucker, anarchism insists on the abolition of the state and the abolition of usury, on no more government of man by man, and no more exploitation of man by man. Cited by Eunice Schuster, Native American Anarchism. All anarchists view profit, interest, and rent as usury, that is, as exploitation, and so oppose them and the conditions that create them, just as much as they oppose government and the state. More generally, in the words of L. Susan Brown, the unifying link within anarchism is a universal condemnation of hierarchy and domination, and a willingness to fight for the freedom of the human individual. The politics of individualism. For anarchists, a person cannot be free if they are subject to state or capitalist authority. As Voltairine de Cleyre summarized, anarchism teaches the possibility of a society in which the needs of life may be fully supplied for all, and in which the opportunities for complete development of mind and body shall be the heritage of all. It teaches that the present unjust organization of the production and distribution of wealth must finally be completely destroyed and replaced by a system which will ensure to each the liberty to work without first seeking a master to whom he or she must surrender a tithe of his or her product, which will guarantee his liberty of access to the sources and means of production. Out of the blindly submissive, it makes the discontented. Out of the unconsciously dissatisfied, it makes the consciously dissatisfied. Anarchism seeks to arouse the consciousness of oppression, the desire for a better society, and a sense of necessity for unceasing warfare against capitalism and the state. Anarchy, an anthology of Emma Goldman's Mother Earth. So anarchism is a political theory which advocates the creation of anarchy, a society based on the maxim of no rulers. To achieve this, in common with all socialists, the anarchists hold that the private ownership of land, capital, and machinery has had its time, that it is condemned to disappear, and that all requisites for production must, and will, become the common property of society and be managed in common by the producers of wealth. And they maintain that the society of the political organization and they maintain that the ideal of the political organization of society is a condition of things where the functions of government are reduced to minimum, and that the ultimate aim of society is the reduction of the functions of government to nil, that is, to a society without government, to anarchy. Peter Kropotkin. Thus, anarchism is both positive and negative. It analyzes and critiques current society, while at the same time offering a vision of a potential new society, a society that fulfills certain human needs which the current one denies. These needs, at their most basic, are liberty, equality, and solidarity. Will be discussed in section A.2. Anarchism unites critical analysis with hope, for, as Bakunin in his pre-anarchist days pointed out, the urge to destroy is a creative urge. One cannot build a better society without understanding what is wrong with the present one. However, It must be stressed that anarchism is more than just a means of analysis or a vision of a better society. It is also rooted in struggle of the oppressed for their freedom. In other words, it provides a means of achieving a new system based on the needs of people, not power, and which places the planet before profit. To quote Scottish anarchist Stuart Christie, anarchism is a movement for human freedom. It is concrete, democratic, and egalitarian. Anarchism began and remains a direct challenge by the underprivileged to their oppression and exploitation. It opposes both the insidious growth of state power and the pernicious ethos of possessive individualism, which, together or separately, ultimately serve only the interests of the few at the expense of the rest. Anarchism is both a theory and a practice of life. Philosophically, it aims for the maximum accord between the individual, society, and nature. Practically, it aims for us to organize and live our lives in such a way as to make politicians, governments, states, and their officials superfluous. In an anarchist society, mutually respectful, sovereign individuals would be organized in non-coercive relationships within naturally defined communities in which the means of production and distribution are held in common. Anarchists are not dreamers, obsessed with abstract principles and theoretical constructs. Anarchists are well aware that a perfect society cannot be won tomorrow. Indeed, the struggle lasts forever. However, it is the vision that provides the spur to struggle against things as they are, and for things as they might be. Ultimately, only struggle determines outcome, and progress towards a more meaningful community must begin with the will to resist every form of injustice. In general terms, this means challenging all exploitation and defying the legitimacy of all coercive authority. If anarchists have one article of unshakable faith, it is that, once the habit of deferring to politicians or ideologues is lost, and that of resistance to domination and exploitation acquired, then ordinary people have a capacity to organize every aspect of their lives in their own interests, anywhere and at any time, both freely and fairly. Anarchists do not stand aside from popular struggle, nor do they attempt to dominate it. They seek to contribute practically whatever they can, and also to assist within it the highest possible levels of both individual self-development and of group solidarity. It is possible to recognize anarchist ideas concerning voluntary relationships, egalitarian participation in decision-making processes, mutual aid, and a related critique of all forms of domination in philosophical, social, and revolutionary movements in all times and places. My granny made me an anarchist. Anarchism, anarchists argue, is simply the theoretical expression of our capacity to organize ourselves and run society without bosses or politicians. It allows working class and other oppressed people to become conscious of our power as a class, defend our immediate interests, and fight to revolutionize society as a whole. Only by doing this can we create a society fit for human beings to live in. It is no abstract philosophy. Anarchist ideas are put into practice every day. Wherever oppressed people stand up for their rights and take action to defend their freedom, practice solidarity and cooperation, fight against oppression, organize themselves without leaders and bosses, the spirit of anarchism lives. Anarchists simply seek to strengthen these libertarian tendencies and bring them to their full fruition. As we discuss in Section J, anarchists apply their ideas in many ways within capitalism in order to change it for the better until such time as we get rid of it completely. Section I discusses what we aim to replace it with, that is, what anarchism aims for. A.1.3. Why is anarchism also called libertarian socialism? Many anarchists, seeing the negative nature of the definition anarchism, have used other terms to emphasize the inherently positive and constructive aspects of their ideas. The most common terms used are free socialism, free communism, libertarian socialism, and libertarian communism. For anarchists, libertarian socialism, libertarian communism, and anarchism are virtually interchangeable. As Vanzetti put it, after all, we are socialists, as the Social Democrats, the Socialists, the Communists, and the IWW are our socialists. The difference, the fundamental one, between us and all the other, is that they are authoritarian while we are libertarian. They believe in a state or a government of their own. We believe in no state or government. Nicola Sacco and Bartolomeo Vanzetti, The Letters of Sacco and Vanzetti. But is this correct? Considering the definitions from the American Heritage Dictionary, we find libertarian, one who believes in freedom of action and thought, one who believes in free will. Socialism, a social system in which the producers possess both political power and the means of producing and distributing goods. Just taking those first two definitions and fusing them yields libertarian socialism, a social system which believes in freedom of action and thought, and free will, in which the producers possess both political power and the means of producing and distributing goods. Although we must add that our usual comments on the lack of political sophistication of dictionaries still hold. We only use these definitions to show that libertarian does not imply free market capitalism, nor does socialism state ownership. Other dictionaries obviously will have different definitions, particularly for socialism. Those wanting to debate dictionary definitions are free to pursue this unending and politically useless hobby, but we will not. However, due to the creation of the Libertarian Party in the USA, many people now consider the idea of libertarian socialism to be a contradiction in terms. Indeed, many libertarians think anarchists are just attempting to associate the anti-libertarian ideas of socialism, as libertarians conceive it, with libertarian ideology in order to make those socialist ideas more acceptable. In other words, trying to steal the libertarian label from its rightful possessors. Nothing could be further from the truth. Anarchists have been using the term libertarian to describe themselves and their ideas since the 1850s. According to anarchist historian Max Nettlau, the revolutionary anarchist Joseph Dajac published Les Libertaires, Journal du Mouvement Social, in New York between 1858 and 1861, while the use of the term libertarian communism dates from November 1880, when a French anarchist congress adopted it. Max Nettlau, A Short History of Anarchism. The use of the term libertarian by anarchists became more popular from the 1890s onward after it was used in France in an attempt to get round anti-anarchist laws and to avoid the negative associations of the word anarchy in the popular mind. Sébastien Faure and Louis Michel published the paper Le Libertaire, the Libertarian, in France in 1895, for example. Since then, particularly outside America, it has always been associated with anarchist ideas and movements. Taking a more recent example, in the USA, anarchists organized the Libertarian League in July 1954, which had staunch anarcho-syndicalist principles and lasted until 1965. The US-based Libertarian Party, on the other hand, has only existed since the early 1970s, well over 100 years after anarchists first used the term to describe their political ideas, and 90 years after the expression libertarian communism was first adopted. It is that party, not the anarchists, who have stolen the word. Later, in Section B, we will discuss why the idea of a libertarian capitalism as desired by the Libertarian Party, is a contradiction in terms. As we will also explain in Section I, only a libertarian socialist system of ownership can maximize individual freedom. Needless to say, state ownership, what is commonly called socialism, is, for anarchists, not socialism at all. In fact, as we will elaborate in Section H, state socialism is just a form of capitalism with no socialist content whatever. As Rudolf Rocker noted, for anarchists, socialism is not a simple question of a full belly, but a question of culture that would have to enlist the sense of personality and the free initiative of the individual. Without freedom, it would lead only to dismal state capitalism, which would sacrifice all individual thought and feeling to a fictitious collective interest. Quoted by Colin Ward, Introduction, Rudolf Rocker, The London News. Given the anarchist pedigree of the word libertarian, few anarchists are happy to see it stolen by an ideology which shares little with our ideas. In the United States, as Murray Bookchin noted, the term libertarian itself, to be sure, raises a problem, notably the specious identification of an anti-authoritarian ideology with a straggling movement for pure capitalism and free trade. This movement never created the word. It appropriated it from the anarchist movement of the 19th century. And it should be recovered by those anti-authoritarians who try to speak for dominated people as a whole, not for personal egotists who identify freedom with entrepreneurship and profit. Thus, anarchists in America should restore in practice a tradition that has been denatured by the free market right. Modern crisis. And as we do that, we will continue to call our ideas libertarian socialism. A.1.4. Are anarchists socialists? Yes. All branches of anarchism are opposed to capitalism. This is because capitalism is based on oppression and exploitation. See sections B and C. Anarchists reject the notion that men cannot work together unless they have a driving master to take a percentage of their profit, and think that in an anarchist society, the real workmen will make their own regulations, decide when and where and how things shall be done. By so doing, workers would free themselves from the terrible bondage of capitalism. Voltairine de Cleyre, Exquisite Rebel. We must stress here that anarchists are opposed to all economic forms which are based on domination and exploitation, including feudalism, Soviet-style socialism, better called state capitalism, slavery, and so on. We concentrate on capitalism because that is what is dominating the world just now. Individualists like Benjamin Tucker, along with social anarchists like Proudhon and Bakunin, proclaimed themselves socialists. They did so because, as Kropotkin put it in his classic essay, Modern Science and Anarchism, so long as socialism was understood in its wide, generic, and true sense as an effort to abolish the exploitation of labor by capital, the anarchists were marching hand in hand with the socialists of that time. Evolution and environment. Or, in Tucker's words, the bottom claim of socialism is that labor should be put in possession of its own. They claim that both the two schools of socialistic thought, state socialism and anarchism, agreed upon. The anarchist reader. Hence, the word socialist was originally defined to include all those who believed in the individual's right to possess what he or she produced. Lance Klafta, Ayn Rand and the Perversion of Libertarianism, and Anarchy, a Journal of Desire Honor. This opposition to exploitation or usury is shared by all true anarchists and places them under the socialist banner. For most socialists, the only guarantee not to be robbed of the fruits of your labor is to possess the instruments of labor. Der Kropotkin, The Conquest of Bread. For this reason, Proudhon, for example, supported workers' cooperatives, where every individual employed in the association has an undivided share in the property of the company, because participation in losses and gains, the collective force, that is, surplus, ceases to be a source of profits for a small number of managers. It becomes the property of all workers. General idea of the revolution. Thus, in addition to desiring the end of exploitation of labor by capital, true socialists also desire a society within which the producers own and control the means of production, including, it should be stressed, those workplaces which supply services. The means by which the producers will do this is a moot point in anarchist and other socialist circles, but the desire remains a common one. Anarchists favor direct workers' control and either ownership by workers' associations or by the commune. See section A.3 on the different types of anarchists. Moreover, anarchists also reject capitalism for being authoritarian as well as exploitative. Under capitalism, workers do not govern themselves during the production process, nor have control over the product of their labor. Such a situation is hardly based on equal freedom for all, nor can it be non-exploitative, and is so opposed by anarchists. This perspective can best be found in the work of Proudhon, who inspired both Tucker and Bakunin, where he argues that anarchism would see capitalistic and proprietary exploitation stopped everywhere and the wage system abolished, for either the workman will simply be the employee of the proprietor capitalist promoter, or he will participate. In the first case, the workman is subordinated, exploited. His permanent condition is one of obedience. In the second case, he resumes his dignity as a man and citizen. He forms part of the producing organization, of which he was before but the slave. We need not hesitate, for we have no choice. It is necessary to form an association among workers, because without that they would remain related as subordinates and superiors, and there would ensue two castes of masters and wage workers, which is repugnant to a free and democratic society. Therefore, all anarchists are anti-capitalist. If labor owned the wealth it produced, there would be no capitalism. Alexander Berkman, What is Anarchism? Benjamin Tucker, for example, the anarchist most influenced by liberalism, as we will discuss later, called his ideas anarchistic socialism, and denounced capitalism as a system based upon the usurer, the receiver of interests, rent, and profit. Tucker held that in an anarchist, non-capitalist free market society, capitalists will become redundant and exploitation of labor by capital would cease, since labor will secure its natural wage, its entire product. The individualist anarchists. Such an economy will be based on mutual banking and the free exchange of products between cooperatives, artisans, and peasants. For Tucker and other individualistic anarchists, capitalism is not a true free market, being marked by various laws and monopolies which ensure that capitalists have the advantage over working people, so ensuring the latter's exploitation via profit, interest, and rent. See Section G for a fuller discussion. Even Max Stirner, the arch-egoist, had nothing but scorn for capitalist society and its various spooks, which for him meant ideas that are treated as sacred or religious, such as private property, competition, division of labor, and so forth. So anarchists consider themselves as socialists, but socialists of a specific kind, libertarian socialists. As the individual anarchist Joseph A. Labadie puts it, echoing both Tucker and Bakunin, it is said that anarchism is not socialism. This is a mistake. Anarchism is voluntary socialism. There are two kinds of socialism, anarchistic and anarchistic, authoritarian and libertarian, state and free. Indeed, every proposition for social betterment is either to increase or decrease the powers of external wills and forces over the individual. As they increase, they are archistic. As they decrease, they are anarchistic. Labadie stated on many occasions that all anarchists are socialists, but not all socialists are anarchists. Therefore, Daniel Guérin's comment that anarchism is really a synonym for socialism. The anarchist is primarily a socialist whose aim is to abolish the exploitation of man by man. It is echoed throughout the history of the anarchist movement, be it the social or individualist anarchist wings. Indeed, the Haymarket martyr, Adolf Fischer, used almost exactly the same words as Labadie to express the same fact. Every anarchist is a socialist, but every socialist is not necessarily an anarchist, while acknowledging that the movement was divided into two factions, the communistic anarchists and the Proudhon or middle-class anarchists. The autobiographies of the Haymarket martyrs. So, while social and individualistic anarchists do disagree on many issues, for example, whether a true, that is, non-capitalist free market would be the best means of maximizing liberty, they agree that capitalism is to be opposed as exploitative and oppressive, and that an anarchistic society must, by definition, be based on associated, not wage, labor. Only associated labor will decrease the powers of external wills and forces over the individual during working hours, and such self-management of work by those who do it is the core ideal of real socialism. This perspective can be seen when Joseph Labadie argued that the trade union was the exemplification of gaining freedom by association, and that without his union, the workman is much more the slave of his employer than he is with it. Different phases of the labor question. However, the meaning of words change over time. Today's socialism almost always refers to state socialism, a system that all anarchists have opposed as a denial of freedom and genuine socialist ideals. All anarchists would agree with Noam Chomsky's statement on this issue. If the left is understood to include Bolshevism, then I would flatly disassociate myself from the left. Lenin was one of the greatest enemies of socialism. Marxism, Anarchism, and Alternative Futures. Anarchism developed in constant opposition to the ideas of Marxism, social democracy, and Leninism. Long before Lenin rose to power, Mikhail Bakunin warned that the followers of Marx against the red bureaucracy that would institute the worst of all despotic governments. If Marx's state socialist ideas were ever implemented. Indeed, the works of Stirner, Proudhon, and especially Bakunin all predict the horror of state socialism with great accuracy. In addition, the anarchists were among the first and most vocal critics in opposition to the Bolshevik regime in Russia. Nevertheless, being socialists, anarchists do share some ideas with some Marxists, though none with Leninists. Both Bakunin and Tucker accepted Marx's analysis and critique of capitalism, as well as his labor theory of value. See Section C. Marx himself was heavily influenced by Max Stirner's book, The Ego and Its Own, which contains a brilliant critique of what Marx called vulgar communism as well as state socialism. There have also been elements of the Marxist movement holding views very similar to social anarchism, particularly the anarcho-syndicalist branch of social anarchism. For example, Anton Pannekoek, Rosa Luxemburg, Paul Maddock, and others, who are very far from Lenin. Karl Korsch and others wrote sympathetically of the anarchist revolution in Spain. There are many continuities from Marx to Lenin, but there are also continuities from Marx to more libertarian Marxists, who were harshly critical of Lenin and Bolshevism, and whose ideas approximate anarchism's desire for the free association of equals. Therefore, anarchism is basically a form of socialism, one that stands in direct opposition to what is usually defined as socialism, that is, state ownership and control. Instead of central planning, which many people associate with the word socialism, anarchists advocate free association and cooperation between individuals, workplaces, and communities, and so oppose state socialism as a form of state capitalism, in which every man and woman will be a wage receiver and the state the only wage payer. Benjamin Tucker, The Individualist Anarchists. Thus, anarchists reject Marxism, what most people think of as socialism, as the idea of the state as capitalist, to which the social democratic fraction of the Great Socialist Party is now trying to reduce socialism. Peter Kropotkin, The Great French Revolution. The anarchist objection to the identification of Marxism, central planning, and state socialism capitalism with socialism will be discussed in Section H. It is because of these differences with state socialists, and to reduce confusion, most anarchists just call themselves anarchists, as it is taken for granted that anarchists are socialists. However, with the rise of the so-called libertarian right in the USA, some pro-capitalists have taken to calling themselves anarchists, and that is why we have labored the point somewhat here. Historically, and logically, anarchism implies anti-capitalism. That is, socialism, which is something we stress that all anarchists have agreed upon. For a fuller discussion of why anarcho-capitalism is not anarchist, see Section F. A.1.5. Where does anarchism come from? Where does anarchism come from? We can do no better than quote the organizational platform of the Libertarian Communists produced by participants of the Makhnovist movement in the Russian Revolution. See Section A.5.4. They point out that the class struggle created by the enslavement of workers and their aspirations to liberty gave birth, in the oppression, to the idea of anarchism, the idea of the total negation of a social system based on the principles of classes and the state, and its replacement by a free, non-status society of workers under self-management. So anarchism does not derive from the abstract reflections of an intellectual or philosopher, but from the direct struggle of workers against capitalism, from the needs and necessities of the worker, from their aspirations to liberty and equality, aspirations which become particularly alive in the best heroic period of the life and struggle of the working masses. The outstanding anarchist thinkers, Bakunin, Kropotkin, and the others, did not invent the idea of anarchism, but having discovered it in the masses, simply helped by the strength of their thought and knowledge to specify and spread it. Like the anarchist movement in general, the Makhnovists were a mass movement of working-class people resisting the forces of authority, both red, communist, and white, Tsarist capitalist, in the Ukraine from 1917 to 1921. As Peter Marshall notes, anarchism has traditionally found its chief supporters amongst workers and peasants, demanding the impossible. Anarchism was created in and by the struggle of the oppressed for freedom. For Kropotkin, for example, anarchism originated in everyday struggles, and the anarchist movement was renewed each time it received an impression from some great practical lesson. It derived its origin from the teachings of life itself, evolution and environment. For Proudhon, the proof of his mutualist ideas lay in the current practice, revolutionary practice, of those labor associations which have spontaneously been formed in Paris and Lyon, to show that the organization of credit and organization of labor amount to one and the same. No gods, no masters. Indeed, as one historian argues, there was close similarity between the associated ideal of Proudhon and the program of the Lyon Mutualists, and that there was a remarkable convergence between the ideas, and it is likely that Proudhon was able to articulate his positive program more coherently because of the example of the silk workers of Lyon. The socialist ideal that he championed was already being realized to a certain extent by such workers. K. Stephen Vincent, Pierre-Joseph Proudhon, and the Rise of French Republican Socialism. Thus, anarchism comes from the fight for liberty and our desires to lead a fully human life, one in which we have time to live, to love, and to play. It was not created by a few people divorced from life in ivory towers looking down upon society and making judgments upon it based on their notions of what is right and wrong. Rather, it was a product of working-class struggle and resistance to authority, oppression, and exploitation. As Albert Meltzer put it, there was never such theoreticians of anarchism as such, though it produced a number of theoreticians who discussed aspects of its philosophy. Anarchism has remained a creed that has been worked out in action rather than as the putting into practice of an intellectual idea. Very often, a bourgeois writer comes along and writes down what has already been worked out in practice by workers and peasants. He or she is attributed by bourgeois historians as being a leader, and by successive bourgeois writers citing the bourgeois historians as being one more case that proves the working class relies on bourgeois leadership. Anarchism, arguments for and against. In Kropotkin's eyes, anarchism had its origins in the same creative, constructive activity of the masses which has worked out in times past all the social institutions of mankind, and in the revolts against the representatives of force external to those social institutions who had laid their hands on these institutions and used them for their own advantage. More recently, anarchism was brought forth by the same critical and revolutionary protest which gave birth to socialism in general. Anarchism, unlike other forms of socialism, lifted its sacrilegious arm not only against capitalism, but also against these pillars of capitalism: law, authority, and the state. All anarchist writers did was to work out a general expression of anarchism's principles, and the theoretical and scientific basis of its teachings, derived from the experiences of working-class people in struggle, as well as analyzing the evolutionary tendencies of society in general. However, anarchistic tendencies and organizations in society have existed long before Proudhon put pen to paper in 1840 and declared himself an anarchist. While anarchism as a specific political theory was born with the rise of capitalism, anarchism emerged at the end of the 18th century and took up the dual challenge of overthrowing both capital and the state. Anarchist writers have analyzed history for libertarian tendencies. Kropotkin, for example, that from all times there have been anarchists and statists. In Mutual Aid and elsewhere, Kropotkin analyzed the libertarian aspects of previous societies and noted that those that successfully implemented to some degree anarchist organization or aspects of anarchism. He recognized this tendency of actual examples of anarchistic ideas to predate the creation of the official anarchist movement, and argued that, from the remotest Stone Age antiquity, men and women have realized the evils that result from letting some of them acquire personal authority. Consequently, they developed in the primitive clan, the village community, the medieval guild, and finally the free medieval city, such institutions as enabled them to resist the encroachments upon their life and fortunes, both of those strangers who conquered them and those clansmen of their own who endeavored to establish their personal authority. Anarchism. Kropotkin placed the struggle of working-class people, from which modern anarchism sprung, on par with these older forms of popular organization. He argued that the labor combinations were an outcome of the same popular resistance to the growing power of the few, the capitalists in this case, as were the clan, the village community, and so on, as were the strikingly independent, freely federated activity of the sections of Paris and all the great cities and many small communes during the French Revolution in 1793. Thus, while anarchism as a political theory is an expression of working-class struggle and self-activity against capitalism and the modern state, the ideas of anarchism have continually expressed themselves in action throughout human existence. Many indigenous peoples in North America and elsewhere, for example, practiced anarchism for thousands of years before anarchism as a specific political theory existed. Similarly, anarchistic tendencies and organizations have existed in every major revolution. The New England town meetings during the American Revolution, the Parisian sections during the French Revolution, the workers' councils and factory committees during the Russian Revolution, to name just a few examples. See Murray Bookchin's The Third Revolution for details. This is to be expected if anarchism is, as we argue, a product of resistance to authority. Then any society with authorities will provoke resistance to them and generate anarchistic tendencies. Of course, any societies without authorities cannot help but being anarchistic. In other words, anarchism is an expression of the struggle against oppression and exploitation, a generalization of working people's experiences and analyses of what is wrong with the current system, and an expression of our hopes and dreams for a better future. This struggle existed before it was called anarchism, but the historic anarchist movement, that is, groups of people calling their ideas anarchism and aiming for an anarchist society, is essentially a product of working-class struggle against capitalism and the state, against oppression and exploitation, and for a free society of free and equal individuals. If the anarcho-capitalist is to claim with any plausibility that real capitalism is non-statist, or that it can exist without a state, it must be shown that capitalism evolved naturally in opposition to state intervention. In reality, the opposite is the case. Capitalism was born from state intervention. To have that's what happened. Okay. All right. Section 8.2. My apologies for that. 8.2. What does anarchism stand for? These words by Percy Bysshe Shelley gives an idea of what anarchism stands for in practice and what ideals drive it. The man of virtuous soul commands not nor obeys. Power, like a desolating pestilence, pollutes whate'er it touches, and obedience, bane of all genius, virtue, freedom, truth, makes slaves of men and of the human frame a mechanized automaton. As Shelley's lines suggest, anarchists place a high priority on liberty, desiring it both for themselves and others. They also consider individuality, that which makes one a unique person, to be the most important aspect of humanity. They recognize, however, that individuality does not exist in a vacuum, but is a social phenomenon. Outside of society, individuality is impossible, since one needs other people in order to develop, expand, and grow. Moreover, Between individual and social development, there is a reciprocal effect. Individuals grow within and are shaped by a particular society, while at the same time, they help shape and change aspects of that society, as well as themselves and other individuals, by their actions and thoughts. A society not based on free individuals, their hopes, dreams, and ideas, would thus be hollow and dead. Thus, the making of a human being is a collective process, a process which is both community and in which both community and the individual participate. Murray Bookchin, The Modern Crisis. Consequently, any political theory which bases itself purely on the social or the individual is false. In order for individuality to develop to the fullest possible extent, anarchists consider it essential to create a society based on three principles: liberty, equality, and solidarity. These principles are shared by all anarchists. Thus, we find the communist anarchist Peter Kropotkin talking about a revolution inspired by the beautiful words liberty, equality, and solidarity. The Conquest of Bread. Individualist anarchist Benjamin Tucker wrote of a similar vision, arguing that anarchism insists on socialism, on true socialism, anarchistic socialism, the prevalence on earth of liberty, equality, and solidarity, instead of a book. All three principles are interdependent. Liberty is essential for the full flowering of human intelligence, creativity, and dignity. To be dominated by another is to be denied the chance to think and act for oneself, which is the only way to grow and develop one's individuality. Domination also stifles innovation and personal responsibility, leading to conformity and mediocrity. Thus, the society that maximizes the growth of individuality will necessarily be based on voluntary association, not coercion and authority. To quote Proudhon, all associated and all free. Or, as Luigi Galliani puts it, anarchism is the autonomy of the individual within the freedom of association. The end of anarchism. See further, section A.2.2, Why do anarchists emphasize liberty? If liberty is essential for the fullest development of individuality, then equality is essential for genuine liberty to exist. There can be no real freedom in a class-stratified, hierarchical society riddled with gross inequalities of power, wealth, and privilege. For in such a society, only a few, those at the top of the hierarchy, are relatively free. All the rest are semi-slaves. Hence, without equality, liberty becomes a mockery. At best, the freedom to choose one's master, or boss, as under capitalism. Moreover, even the elite under such conditions are not really free, because they must live in a stunted society made ugly and barren by the tyranny and alienation of the majority. And since individuality develops to the fullest only with the widest contact with other free individuals, members of the elite are restricted in the possibilities for their own development by the scarcity of free individuals with whom to interact. See also section A.2.5, Why are anarchists in favor of equality? Finally, solidarity means mutual aid, working voluntarily and cooperatively with others who share the same goals and interests. But without liberty and equality, society becomes a pyramid of competing classes based on the domination of the lower by the higher strata. In such a society, as we know from our own, it's a dominate or be dominated, dog eat dog, and everyone for themselves. This rugged individualism is promoted at the expense of community feeling, with those on the bottom resenting those above them, and those on the top fearing those below them. Under such conditions, there can be no society-wide solidarity, but only a partial form of solidarity within classes whose interests are opposed, which weakens society as a whole. See also section A.2.6, why is solidarity important to anarchists? It should be noted that solidarity does not imply self-sacrifice or self-negation. As Enrico Malatesta makes clear, we are all egoists. We all seek our own satisfaction. But the anarchist finds his greatest satisfaction in struggling for the good of all, for the achievement of a society in which he can be a brother among brothers and among healthy, intelligent, educated, and happy people. But he who is adaptable, who is satisfied to live among slaves and draw profit from the labor of slaves, is not and cannot be an anarchist. Enrico Malatesta, His Life and Ideas. For anarchists, real wealth is other people and the planet on which we live. Or, in the words of Emma Goldman, it consists in things of utility and beauty, in things which help to create strong, beautiful bodies and surroundings inspiring to live in. Our goal is the freest possible expression of all the latent powers of the individual, such free display of human energy being possible only under complete individual and social freedom, in other words, social equality. Read Emma Speaks. Also, honoring individuality does not mean that anarchists are idealists, thinking that people or ideas develop outside of society. Individuality and ideas grow and develop within society in response to material and intellectual interactions and experiences, which people actively analyze and interpret. Anarchism, therefore, is a materialist theory, recognizing that ideas develop and grow from social interaction and individuals' mental activity. See Mikhail Bakunin's God and the State for the classic discussion of materialism versus idealism. This means that an anarchist society will be the creation of human beings, not some deity or other transcendental principle, since nothing ever arranges itself, least of all in human relations. It is men who do the arranging, and they do it according to their attitudes and understanding of things. Alexander Berkman, What is Anarchism? Therefore, anarchism bases itself upon the power of ideas and the ability of people to act and transform their lives based on what they consider to be right. In other words, liberty. And we're just about at an hour, so that's it for tonight. I hope you've enjoyed it. Tomorrow, being Palm Sunday for those who use the Gregorian calendar, I will begin a reading of The Last Week by John Dominic Crossan and Marcus Borg, which is a commentary on the final week of the life of Jesus, beginning with his entrance into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday and culminating with his death and being laid in the tomb and his internment on Holy Saturday. I have no Patreon or anything like that. Instead of giving me or anyone else money, go to iww.org and join the Industrial Workers of the World, or one of the other organizations I mentioned at the top of the stream. Remember, a better world is possible, if we have the gumption to bring it about. Good night, and go fight for the self-emancipation of the working class.